Welcome to Lunchtime. Yay! We're here at the lunch table. And here at lunchtime, that this is where the conversation is hot. We are always talking about all kinds of fun topics. We're trying to live our best life. We're trying to do all kinds of great things. We're trying to improve our families. We're just trying to make life the best it can be. And today I am so excited. I have a longtime friend who is going to be here with us. And let me tell you, I told you last week she was coming. And she is going to bring some information. When you bring questions to me, then I'm thinking, okay, I need to get an authority because there are some things I know and we have to be accept those things that we don't know, and we turn them over to those who do. So I am going to introduce to all of you Dr. Cheryl Al-Mateen. And Cheryl, I welcome you to the lunch table. Yay!
Thank you for inviting me to the lunch table. I'm very happy to be here and very happy to answer questions. I know that lots of people have asked you questions, and I'm happy to do my best to try and answer them.
Yay! Well, let me kind of brief those who haven't been here or perhaps didn't know what we were going to do today. Now, today we are taking a look. I've got notes here because I wanted to make sure that I didn't leave anything out. Guys, when I get serious and there's something that I think we really need to talk about, we need notes. So we want this to be informative. And we have been through some things over the past couple of years and a little over, and our children have been through some things. And so, because of that, as parents, as grandparents, aunties, and uncles, we want to be available to our children. And as we see things that our children need, we want to be able to provide that for them.
Exactly.
And so we're going to be talking about one of the things that came up was children who are dealing with depression, children who are suffering from stress. And the number of children with depression and stress is on the rise. And the number of people, not just children. So understand the information that she's giving you is going to be kind of sort of geared to those of us who are parents and grandparents and those kind of things. But if you need it, then take that information and digest it because it may be something well. Now, I'm going to call her Cheryl, but of course she's Dr. Al-Mateen. And do you care?
No, I do not care.
Okay.
My name is Cheryl.
All right. So at the lunch table, we try to just be all here.
Sure.
And so, Cheryl, we have been talking about our children, and we have been talking about the fact that our children are really stressed. I think that's the best word for it. And they don't know what to do. They don't really recognize what's really happening within them. And parents, because let's face it, parents are pretty stressed too, because they're trying to navigate the work world, whether they're at home or whether they're virtual. All kinds of things are changing. Some people, children were used to seeing are gone, unfortunately. And so some of their support system may be gone. So as we look at all of this, and as questions came of what do we do if we see Johnny having problems and he's not my child, he belongs to someone else, but how do I say to them nicely, I'm just noticing a change. And when you say that, I usually think, okay, do you have a suggestion? And so, I hate saying something and then I can't tell you what to do or I tell you who to go to or who to talk to. So those are the things that we're going to talk about. And so first, we'd like for you to kind of introduce yourself, tell us
Okay.
what you do, those kind of things. And then help, help, we need
Okay.
help.
So who am I? My name is Cheryl Al-Mateen. I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist. As a psychiatrist, that means that I'm a physician. And so I went to medical school. And in the mental health world, there are a bunch of different specialists who can do work. So there are psychiatrists, there are psychologists who have PhDs or PsyDs, and they are therapists typically. There are licensed clinical social workers and licensed professional counselors. Those are the licenses in Virginia. And so all of these people can see patients, evaluate patients, do psychotherapy, and psychiatrists can provide medication. Psychologists can do psychological testing to understand things that we're not able to get really clearly through conversation and interviewing. I work at a children's psychiatric hospital called the Virginia Treatment Center for Children, and it's part of Virginia Commonwealth University here in the Richmond, Virginia area. And I am an academic, so I'm a teacher, like you, and like many of our friends. And so I teach medical students, psychiatry residents, and child and adolescent psychiatry fellows. And my current job, besides seeing patients, is to help direct the education of those fellows that come to Virginia Treatment Center for Children for their training. Did that tell you enough about what I do?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All
And
right.
you're also a mom,
I am a mom.
wife.
I am a wife. My
Yeah.
children are grown. They are 34 and 28. Yes. And you met my son when he was 1. So we have been friends for a very long time.
Mhm.
And they live in California and New York, living their best lives. And my husband is retired, and I'm still working because I love my job. So
Mhm.
there we are.
But you're needed. You are needed. You
Hmm.
can't go anywhere yet.
And we go to the same church, and so that's how we
Absolutely.
met each other.
Mhm.
So I think that's enough about my personal stuff. Does
Yeah,
that sound
yeah,
good? Okay.
absolutely,
All right.
absolutely. Well, now that everybody's at the table, we are no longer strangers, everybody's friends and family. So let's get into the conversation.
Okay.
We need help.
Okay. So let's do some big picture things. Um, About 1 out of 5 people end up with a psychiatric illness at some time over their lives, 20% of the population. It is not different for children and adolescents.
Okay.
50% of mental illness shows up before the age of 14 in some way, shape, or
Wow.
form. And that's not even COVID related. That's
Hmm.
just what it is.
Hmm.
And so it may be, the numbers might be more like 1 in 6 for kids and 1 in 5 for adults as a whole. And then it'll be a little bit higher, maybe a little bit higher because a lot more mental illness will present in the mid 20s, perhaps. But in general, it's a 1 in 5 kind of situation.
Hmm.
Parents, friends, family members, and kids sometimes themselves are noticing when things happen. A lot of times, children who have bad things that are happening to them are identified through the Child Protective Services route, and 25% of those reports come from teachers and schools. And that has been a big deal with COVID because kids were not in schools and being seen by teachers close up and personal the way that they were before. So, just like adults who had a lot of problems at home and couldn't get out of their home because of COVID, the same thing happened with children. And I often work on inpatient units for kids. And we had a lot of kids who were very sick, got abused more during the time that everybody was on lockdown. And then they ended up in emergency rooms. And the numbers were so dire that kids would get stuck in emergency rooms waiting for hospital beds for psychiatric issues.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened all over the country. And I believe
Mm-hmm.
it's happening all over the world. I think that has happened. So the mental health provider stream is stressed, and people have long waiting lists, particularly for therapy. We are really lucky that now, and I think this is also worldwide, that telehealth has become more consistent all over.
Okay.
And it's harder in rural areas because if there's not broadband, then it's hard for folks to get care out there. But in general, telehealth has been hugely helpful
Mm-hmm.
and has provided more care to
Mm-hmm.
individuals. So I think that is an international thing. I don't know that you particularly want statistics. I think general numbers is okay,
Yeah.
right, for this
Mm-hmm. That's
conversation.
good. Yeah.
Okay. And so, with that, when we think about what kinds of things should make us concerned that kids, adolescents, young adults, and older adults, right, in our lives are having something happen with them from a mental health perspective, we are looking for a change. Sometimes it is really hard for kids because kids are developing and everything is all about the change. So you're like, well, is this a normal change?
Right.
All adolescents kind of look like there are real problems there. And so how do we know that it's something that we need to address?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that what we're really looking for is change that contributes to a decrease in functioning. So we know that 12 and 14-year-old people are discovering different parts about themselves, different
Oh
identities. They're coming back with different hair, different clothes, different scents. And we're like, oh my goodness, listening to different music, all of these
yeah.
things.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're still in school and their grades are good, and you are, they're still bringing their friends home to meet you, and you have a sense of who's there, then things are better. They're okay. This is kind of normal. You're talking to their. You and I used to do this all the time. Are you talking
Absolutely.
to friends? Have
Uh-huh.
you checked out who? Does everybody have a problem with this kid? What's happening at the parties, who's the mom that knows what should be happening and what not, so you
Mm-hmm.
tie yourself into that parent so that you are getting information. You keep
Mm-hmm.
getting all the information that you can. And as long as you're okay with that flow and the functioning is good, then this is normal adolescent change.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's a good thing. But if we have people who are starting to really worry, be anxious, and isolate themselves and are not able to talk to the people that they used to talk to before. And again, when we're looking at normal adolescents, we're having people who are decreasing how much talking they're doing to their parents, and they're
That's
thinking more
true.
about talking to their friends.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to have those friends over, be the Kool-Aid mom. You and I both did that same thing.
We did.
You're more effective at it, but yeah, yeah. But you want to make sure you're knowing these people, but you're wanting to make sure that they're connecting with them and that you feel like those friends are connected with you in some way to be able to get help. One of the things that schools have worked really hard on is helping kids to know that reporting is not tattling, right?
Right.
And that if you're worried about a friend, then you can reach out to someone and say, I'm worried about my friend.
Mm-hmm.
And kids do this when
They do.
kids post things on the gram or
Mhm.
if any kids are still using Facebook, I'm not sure they are, but on the gram, on Snapchat, on Insta,
Mhm.
on any of those things, kids are posting, their friends are recognizing it, and their friends, their true friends, are calling parents and
Mhm.
saying, we need help. We need help here. And so I get to see a lot of people because their friends have done that. And
That's
that's
good.
something that, as friends of family, right? That as we see kids, then we can do that and we can mention this out. We can mention this to parents. I have lots of friends who I've known for a long time who are following my kids on Insta. And so they're 10-year one, right? And you're saying, I saw this and I saw that and that kind of thing.
Keep an
So,
ear open.
right, keep an ear open, and
Mhm,
that's a channel for
mhm,
how to let parents know that
mhm,
you've seen something that has you concerned about what's
mhm.
going on with their child. So just remember, the better your communication lines are to people, the better information can go. So what kinds of things are we looking about that's a decrease in functioning? Isolation, being really moody, um, kids making frequent comments about being worried or anxious,
Mhm,
um, grades dropping,
mhm,
changing in sleep, changing in eating patterns. Those are the things that we should watch for. If we have somebody and COVID really contributed this, right? People contributed to this.
yeah,
People gained weight and they lost weight
mhm,
because they were so anxious. There were some kids who were not functioning well at school
mhm,
because they could not deal with all that screen time and they
mhm,
weren't able to learn well.
mhm.
And so I have a lot of patients where that was a concern for them. Other kids did better in virtual school. And
Yes.
those are often kids who were being bullied at school.
Mhm,
They weren't
mhm,
scared anymore.
mhm,
Um, and so I have some kids that I work with who just wanted to continue and finish school on
mhm.
an online basis, and they have other means of social interaction.
Yeah.
So I think that the biggest thing is that we're looking for those changes in
Mhm,
functioning. So if somebody was able to manage school and a job and they can't do that anymore, then
mhm,
is that a normal developmental school is getting harder and can't do the job? Because if we can maintain open communication with
mhm,
our kids about what's happening, then that's huge. And then parents who are able to have these conversations and kids who are able to have these conversation, things are it's easier to get help because then you know what it is that's happening. I've seen you writing, so don't know if you have questions so far.
Well, I'm writing because I think what I'm going to do is that I'm going to list those things that you had so we can kind of stream across the bottom.
Okay.
And so one of those things was isolation, right?
Mhm.
Um, and the other was lack of sleep
Mhm.
or not sleeping.
Okay. Right. So then let's talk about those two things. Okay.
Mhm,
Isolation is is confounding. Okay. It's
okay.
confounding because kids go to their room and play video games with friends in other countries and other states. Once
Mhm.
I
That's kind of
walked in and
scary
my son,
sometimes.
right, and once I walked in and my son was speaking French online because he was playing video games with somebody from France. Whoa. Uh, and then he was speaking Japanese, so he was learning all kinds of things. So he felt like he had friends, and I talked to kids who were saying, "These are my friends. I've been playing games with them for a long time, and they feel like those are relationships, and they're not as isolated as their parents might have initially thought they were." But then we also want to check and make sure that they do feel like they have some friends that are at home. The video games can also cause a problem for sleep.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
during much of COVID times, at least when we were all on lockdown, part of it was that some kids in some counties didn't have to do school at the regular time. They could do school at whatever time they wanted to. And
Oh.
so they might go to bed at 2 or
Mhm,
3, get up when they wanted to, get the work done. And because everything was asynchronous, it
wow.
wasn't a problem. So it's important to sort out how the functioning really is for
Mhm.
those kids at those times.
Okay.
We have the American Academy of Pediatrics that provides us
Mhm,
with recommendations for sleep. And
mhm.
Leona, I'm going to give you a Word document with a list of a bunch of resources so that parents can look at those, parents, aunties, uncles, grandparents, everybody, just to have a sense.
Okay. Okay. I'll
They
put
have.
that down. I'll put that link too down in the description box for those of you who may want to go to some of these sources. And you may want to go to the source, if nothing else, just to see what's there.
Mhm.
And for those of you who are in other countries besides the United States, I would certainly think you'd still be able to look at the resources, see what's available, see if there's something comparable in your location, so that should you start to see some of these things along the way, you can certainly tap into that. And if not, you can ask questions at that initial spot, and they may be able to send you to a particular location. So that's something just to keep in mind. So we've talked about the isolation, we've talked about the lack of sleep, and certainly I knew screen time, because sometimes that bothers me.
Mhm.
Um,
And just let me throw out that the American Academy of Pediatrics now has recommendations for a family media
mhm,
time,
mhm.
so that parents and kids can sit down together, because parents have screen issues as well, so that
Yes.
everybody in the family can hold each other accountable, and then that's
Mhm.
something that the family is working on together.
That's true.
Um, Thinking about what happens on screen, sometimes a really good resource is
Mhm.
Commonsensemedia.org.
Ah,
And what that does is help parents understand what's in movies, video games, books, television shows, and helps break down what the ratings are for any of those things. And there are kid ratings as well as parent ratings.
oh,
So
okay.
there was one thing that I saw where parents thought that things were okay for kids over 4, and the kids said, "No, they need to be over 8. They shouldn't be utilizing this resource." So, you can see it for free. There are memberships where you can do other things as well, but Common Sense
Mhm,
Media is something that I frequently, recommend to parents, and
mhm,
especially kids who have 2 or 3 different households.
mhm,
It's
mhm.
important for the parents in all those households to be aware of this
Absolutely.
information.
Absolutely. And
So
I think too, before you get started, but I think too, some children struggled with the fact that they were going from one household to another, and that the situation here was very different from the next situation.
mhm,
And sometimes there was a lack of communication between those
mhm,
two houses, or stress between those two houses. And of course, that compounded the stress that was already on the child. So, those are some things that I'm just throwing out there that I know I've seen,
yes.
and in my work world. But certainly, those are things that I know are an issue. Um, Poor appetite, not eating, um,
Or eating too much.
or eating
Right?
too
So,
much. That's
sleeping
true.
too much and sleeping too little,
Mm-hmm.
eating too much, eating too little,
Mm-hmm.
these are signs that there can be a concern. Now,
Okay.
it can be a concern for a lot of different things, right?
Okay.
So, um, too much or too little of either of those can be indicative of depression,
Okay.
can be indicative of bipolar disorder,
Mm-hmm.
bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 disorder,
Mm-hmm.
um, can relate to body image, that
Mhm,
can relate to depression, right?
mhm,
So
mhm,
all of those things together, changes in appetite are huge, and so
mhm,
kind of understanding what's happening with those are
mhm,
really important. We
mhm,
talked a little bit ago about child protective services and that kind of thing, but one of the
mhm,
things that I want to throw out that's really important for us to be aware of is the impact of trauma on children. And
mhm,
so this is um, not just we may first think about physical abuse of a child by a parent or
mhm,
sexual abuse, but there's also emotional abuse.
mhm.
Bullying at school actually counts for that, because even for for some of us who are old school, right? Let's
Mhm,
say
mhm.
over 50 maybe, we have one kind of bullying that we think of that we were familiar with in school.
Mhm.
That was also traumatic for people at those
Mhm.
times. But now bullying is kind of multidimensional, right? It's not
Mhm.
just physical or
No.
emotional. There's that cyberbullying and
Yeah.
that kind of thing with people being told how they should die or how they should kill themselves and things like that.
Mhm.
And cancel culture is showing up in these young people. Other things that can be traumatic to children that contribute to the development of psychiatric disorders over time.
Mhm.
Okay, is if their parents have a problem with addiction, if they're watching
Mhm.
their parents fight, if they're witnessing domestic violence, if they're witnessing
Mhm.
violence in their communities, these
Mhm.
are all traumas and what we call adverse childhood experiences, and
Mhm.
these things contribute. We do know that a lot of these experiences increased during COVID
Mhm.
when there weren't as many eyes laid on children,
Mhm.
right? And parents who had addiction problems had more of those addiction problems.
Mhm.
If you have a parent with mental illness who's attempting suicide themselves, right?
Mhm.
That is a trauma for kids. And
Mhm.
one of the things that we learned through what's called the ACEs study, and this is an issue for adults as well as for children because the ACEs study was done on adults, um, is that we find out that if there are over four of these ACEs in a person's life, right? Between the age of 0 and 18, right?
Mhm.
So, and some people also count serious medical issues where you're having a lot of medical procedures because those can be traumatic
Mhm.
too,
Mhm.
right? If a parent is incarcerated, uh,
Right.
if so, we've talked about there's about 10 ACEs, and I think we've just covered all of them. Um,
Mhm.
I'm going to pull up the list to make sure I have it. I'm not going to share the screen, but I'm sharing the site on
Mhm.
that list that we talked about. If a person has over four ACEs, they are significantly more likely to have depression, to have high blood pressure as they grow up, to develop diabetes, perhaps to develop cancer, and a host of other things related to the chronic stress that they've had with these ongoing ACEs over time.
Mhm.
So it's important for people to know that that's a concern for adults too, and that often it's also a huge risk for addiction.
Mhm.
And so that may include addiction to food, so eating disorders, as well as to alcohol or to other substances. And
Mhm.
so that's a big deal for kids and adolescents and for their parents. And very often in families, there's multiple generations of these
Mhm.
cases,
Mhm.
which can make things much worse.
That's
And it can make it harder for parents to recognize what's happening with their kids because
mhm.
they've been through it and it's hard for them to see it happening with their kids.
Mhm.
Um,
Or they
some
don't
people,
wanna see.
or they don't want to see because they
Mhm.
know how bad it was for them.
Mhm.
Another thing that can happen is parents may have handled it one way, but this current generation may have handled it a different way. And
Mhm.
parents might say, "I did okay. Why are you having a problem? I had that problem."
Mhm.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, child.
Yeah.
And that may not be sufficient for these
Mhm.
children. So these are just things for everyone to think about. I'm going to make sure I have the whole list. So emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. Did you feel that nobody in your family loved you or that you weren't
Mhm.
special? Did you feel like you didn't have enough to eat? So if there was neglect or
Mhm.
simply more neglect, right? We know plenty of times
Mhm.
where
Mhm.
people don't have enough to eat, but parents are able to make magic things come out of the refrigerator, right?
Mhm.
So that plenty of food. Sometimes separation and divorce counts as a trauma because
That's
that's
true.
the loss of
That's
a
true.
parent. Was your parent ever abused by the other parent?
Mhm.
Did somebody have a problem with substance use? And if a household member was depressed or mentally ill,
Mhm.
and if somebody went to prison. And so that was the
Mhm.
original list that
Mhm.
we studied, and four or more is a magic number.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, let me ask you this. It seems like uh, as of course, I guess during COVID, you would think the fortunate thing would be that, mom was at home, dad was at home, and you would think that because everybody's at home, that there's a happy family. And what seems to have happened is that, first of all, mom and dad came home. They're in the same place for 24/7. And that caused a level of stress just between them. Because, let's face it, 9 times out of 10, a lot of us, and I include myself, I think that was a major adjustment from retiring, was coming home. And we both retired and we're both in the same house at the same time. Well, for 40 years, we were never in the house at the
Right.
same time.
Right.
He was at work, I was at work, and we were there in the evening, but then we started off the next day. So then all of a sudden, everybody's at home and you're trying to navigate around each other, trying to navigate everybody's emotional whatevers.
Mhm.
And that was a stress factor for
Right.
many students.
Yes.
One thing that one teacher said was that virtual learning opened up everyone's house.
Mhm.
So there were children who may have had food insecurity, their homes may not have been as nice as other people's homes, and having to work virtually, all of this came on screen. So it was very evident that Susie's house looked like this, but Mary's house didn't. And Mary didn't have this where Jane did. And so it caused resentment and anger for some, because then they realized, oh my goodness, yes, we're all in the same classroom, but I don't know you at all.
Right.
And
And
the
for
separation came, real separation came.
true.
And some of those children, once they got back to school, they were not able to come back together.
I think that another thing that kind of added into that, and I agree with what you're saying,
Mhm.
is that COVID didn't come by itself.
Right.
There were other social stressors
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
happened, not just in the United States, because from what
Mhm.
I could see, other places said, hey, look, that's a deal
Mhm.
there and it's a deal here
Yes.
too.
Yes.
So all of the inequities
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
lots of places came
Mhm.
through, and
Oh, yeah.
kids had conversations with their friends that they hadn't had before,
Mhm.
or saw things in their friends, as you point out, that they hadn't realized before.
Mhm.
And so that was also an isolating
Mhm.
experience for some kids.
That's true.
Absolutely.
That's true.
Absolutely.
And while you thought that once they went back to school, that some of that would tone down, it seems it didn't. It didn't. It seems like it's just risen out of the water and they can't get rid of it.
Well, I think that it's not just the school kids. I think our society is extremely polarized right now,
Yeah,
and the
true.
kids have no choice but to be part of the society that is
Mhm.
extremely polarized right now.
Yes.
And so I
Yes.
think we have people at all ages who are
Mhm.
not watching television because there's so much polarization.
I know.
And
I
Netflix
know.
is getting, I don't know, they're saying they're getting less memberships, but there's so many people I know that are simply binging on something on
Mhm.
Netflix or
Right.
another streaming service.
I can't believe they're less because let's face it, you don't want to look at the nightly news on whichever channel it may be. You want to look at a movie or something else, rather
Exactly.
than, and you try to provide things for the kids to watch that are going to be uplifting and funny rather than totally depressing. And
Exactly. Well,
mhm,
people are sharing the memberships is what I'm hearing they're saying. Right.
yes, I heard that. We won't talk about it.
We're not related
We
to
won't do
our
that.
sharing memberships, and there are 100
But
people
if
logging
you
in as
know,
Mary Sue Beth Daughter Girl.
but if and the thing of it is, and I'll say this, if you know that there's someone in your family who is unable to afford
Right.
the cost, and this is the best option for them, we'll hope that the Netflix police and whomever's out there, let's face it, it happens.
I have
You know,
4 people in my family. They should all be able to watch my Netflix.
absolutely. Absolutely. I'm paying it. Anybody I want can watch it. That's kind of like how I feel. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. So, but it is, this is concerning. Well, let me ask you this. If, as a parent, and I'm going to give you an example, I worked with a lady and her son was a teenager starting to get, and he started to build up this anger. Now, to be honest with you, they had the best family. It would have been one of those families I wanted to go jump in. It was one of those. She was the Leave It to Beaver kind of family,
Mhm.
and but bless his heart, I don't know what it was. He hit 13, 14, and this anger came. The doctor thought it was hormonal. His hormones are changing, his body was changing. I guess he wasn't dealing with the change well. Well, at first, of course, back in the day, they were taking the option of, okay, you're going to have to go to your room. You're not going to talk to me like that. You're going to go to your room, as parents would have done. And so, but what ended up having to happen was that they had to look at it from a whole different standpoint because of they got upset because they didn't know how to deal with it. They thought he was being totally disrespectful, which he was. But because of the way they were handling the situation the best they could, they were actually fueling the fire.
Mhm.
In
Mhm.
that he would get even more angry because of how they were responding, but he wasn't talking to them to tell them what really was going on in his head. So they had no idea. So when he went to a specialist, finally was able to share with the specialist. The specialist had sessions with him and then brought the entire family in.
Mhm.
And that's how they learned that what the trigger was. So for them, they were able to then highlight the good points,
Mhm. Mhm.
what you see him doing. Um, if you see him hanging his shirt up rather than throwing it on the floor, make a big issue out of it. Oh, I'm so proud of you. I love that you do so and so. You know,
Positive reinforcement.
yes, using that positive reinforcement. And what happened is that using the positive reinforcement, they were then able to start to see the changes in him.
Mhm.
His anger decreased and eventually just it went away. So, whether there's are there things that maybe as parents that parents don't even realize that they're triggering are, I'll say, encouraging that they could probably tweak and
Wow.
maybe start to turn
Yeah.
it around.
Yeah, so much of that is kind of individual specific and family specific,
Mhm.
right? But I think remembering to use positive reinforcement for our kids is really helpful, not just why don't you, why don't you, why don't you, but oh
Mhm.
yeah, this is great. And then
Mhm.
when things are calm, so would it be possible for you to do that on a regular basis so that we're not tripping over your clothes in the living room? Something like that. But I
Mhm.
think the fact that he was getting so angry,
Mhm.
and nobody understood why he was getting so angry was kind of indicative that there was either it sounds like it was more of a family therapy thing and how
Mhm.
the family was interacting with each other, and
Mhm.
so therapy was what was needed. Uh,
Mhm.
Sometimes that can happen in a sometimes that anger is
Mhm.
actually from depression. because people don't always present with sadness with depression. Sometimes
Mhm.
people get more irritable and grouchy.
Oh,
And
okay.
so may be really offensive and problematic to other people
Mhm.
because of their depression. But
Mhm.
we also may see things like change in sleep and appetite. There might be some
Mhm.
guilt. There may well be some trauma that is there, and the person is dealing with trauma that hasn't been addressed.
Mhm.
So all of those things happen, and starting with a therapist is a great idea.
Mhm.
Sometimes people go to the pediatrician, and it might be easier to get to a psychiatrist if that person is there. And then that
Mhm.
psychiatrist may say, "Oh, we need to start with therapy."
Mhm.
Sometimes it may be something that could be wrong with a body part, like a thyroid, or there
Mhm.
could be a
Mhm.
vitamin imbalance or
Okay.
something like that. And
Mhm.
so we draw labs so that we
Mhm.
can find out that all the parts of the body are generally working okay, so
Mhm.
that we know that that's okay, so that we can then say, all right, um, then this sounds like it's depression, and therapy is very useful. Sometimes you need a combination of therapy and medication. And so a lot of the data on managing depression, the research shows that we need to have both of them in place for at least part of
Mhm.
that time, so that a person will learn coping strategies to
Mhm.
deal with ongoing stressors that they
Mhm.
have in their lives. And if there is uh, a need for medication, then that can be provided as well.
Mhm. You
So I
know,
do think
too.
I think that some people will go to their pediatrician first. There's a problem with my child, and what are we going to do? There are some people who feel like they want to go and talk to their clergy member first, and that's fine
Mhm.
too,
Mhm.
because a lot of times the clergy has a good handle on what's going on with the
Mhm.
family. They
Mhm.
provide counseling to the family, and
Mhm.
I know many ministers, pastors who also make recommendations to other mental health professionals as
Mhm.
well. So people may find that they belong to a group, a social group, where they
Mhm.
can reach out to somebody who's part of that group, and
Mhm.
that person might be able to help bring them in
Mhm.
for some kind of treatment. So people have different folks that they feel comfortable talking to. I
Mhm.
think it's important to talk to somebody that you think might be able to help, and say, and not talk to anyone.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
important to be able to go to your friend and say, I don't know, this, I'm seeing my kid do this. Have you noticed anything? And that gives my friend a place to say, I was worried.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I do see what you're talking about. And I was watching Ebony Ivy and Thyme, and I found out that I should check with a pediatrician, or I could go to the pastor, or I could
Mhm.
go to these other places. There's
Mhm.
a lot of pediatric practices that actually have a psychologist or a social worker that's
Mhm.
embedded in the practice to be able to
That's true.
provide that kind
Mhm.
of assistance, so you don't have to go find somebody else. They're really just right in
Mhm.
the hall, and they're
Mhm.
in that practice. And that's really a good model that has been
Mhm.
started. And
One other thing that we could probably throw in there is the fact that sometimes, let's face it, our kids never listen to us, but there's always someone else
right.
who they will listen to,
Mhm.
and as long as that's a person you can trust, who is going to give them good feedback,
Mhm.
and that gives them an option, of someone to talk to, as well as the school. Counselor or
Exactly.
or a teacher. Sometimes a teacher, especially once they get up into middle school and they have multiple teachers, multiple
Mhm.
personalities, there's
Mhm.
always going to be someone who
Mhm.
connects
You are
with that
absolutely
particular
right.
child. And so when that person, when he or she talks to that person, then they can share,
Right.
whatever the information is or the concern is.
I often talk to kids who say, there's this neighbor that makes a difference. There's
Mm-hmm.
this teacher that I can talk to. My kids had that teacher
Mm-hmm.
that they could talk to.
Mm-hmm.
They said, or the counselor, I have a counselor.
Mhm,
I can talk to them about X, Y, and Z. The
mhm,
schools have therapeutic day treatment programs now that
Hmm.
part of the school. I talked to a parent the other day who said, well, we don't have a special plan at school. They wanted to try the therapeutic day treatment first. And
Oh.
if that resolved things, then I wouldn't need an IEP or
Hmm.
504.
Hmm.
So there's resources in many schools, and especially because your audience is so wide, it's
Hmm.
important to know that different localities have different possibilities. In
Hmm.
California, I've learned an adolescent can go sign up for therapy by themselves, and parents don't have to be involved at all,
Wow.
right?
Mhm.
So while some parents might be less than happy about that, that
Yeah.
is allowing the child to get some services.
Hmm.
So find out what is available. Kids are finding out what's available in their state, and so there's many places, many schools that have the therapeutic day treatment, or who have intensive day programs or programs after school.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of different places where kids can get help. And some schools have therapists that are part of the school, not just a counselor, but a
Hmm.
therapist.
Hmm.
And so they're making those hour-long appointments and getting them during the day. Parents come in for that school, for that
Hmm.
family therapy, and that can happen
Hmm.
as part of the school.
We
So,
have that in Chesterfield. We
mhm,
have counselors that are part of the main part of the system, but when needed, they are specialists who can come in and they will sit in on conferences, work with the family outside of school hours,
excellent.
and to help.
Mhm,
So I'm sure we're not the only one. It may
mhm,
not be in some of the smaller school systems,
mhm.
but certainly in some of the larger school systems, I would hope that they would have that available as well, so that children have someone to talk to. And especially now that bullying and all those things are going on, kids need a voice. They need someone
Absolutely,
who has an ear and someone that they can talk with. Wow.
absolutely.
Wow. Well, how would parents know? I guess it would come through recommendation for
Mhm.
parents to have to take it to a higher level. If children are starting to act out to the point of where, it starts to get physical, whether it's with the parent or it's with the kids at school,
Mhm.
at that point, parents panic.
True. And
And
so
then
then asking their pediatrician for a referral is the first place to go, right? Or asking that pastor for a referral. Do you know of somebody that I could go and see to get this?
what?
There are community mental health centers in different localities. So in Chesterfield, it's Chesterfield Mental Health,
Mhm.
right? And there's Richmond Behavioral Health
Mhm.
Authority, and
Mhm.
then there's Henrico Mental Health, right? So each county has their own mental health service for people who might not have insurance, for
Okay.
example. And
Mhm.
each of those community mental health centers or community service boards, but this is
Mhm.
public mental health, just like there's public physical health, like their health districts where
Mhm.
someone who doesn't have insurance can go and get a physical exam and get other things taken care of. Then there's a parallel system
Mhm.
for mental health. And
Okay.
so people can go to those resources as
Mhm.
well. And there's often sliding scales or an understanding. Now that there's more insurance that is available, and sometimes parents whose jobs don't provide insurance and they make too much money for Medicaid
Mhm.
for the whole family, their
Mhm.
children can get Medicaid on their own, so that
Okay.
they have, the parents can get Medicaid for
The
their children, so that
availability.
children have
Mhm.
have resources for
Mhm.
their medical needs.
Mhm.
So going to those places is an option.
Mhm.
So community mental health, starting with your pediatrician to figure out where to go,
Mhm.
accessing through your clergy, because
Mhm.
mental health communities, care communities, and clergy are beginning to work more closely together.
Okay.
Um, I'm trying to think if there's something else that
See,
I'm
we're spoiled. We're
right.
spoiled because our pastor was in the field of psychology, psychiatry.
Right.
So we were blessed at that
Right.
time because he had exactly what we needed. And so as things change, I
Mhm.
think most pastors have taken a certain amount of guidance and their, types of things. But when they reach a certain point where they've gone as far as they can, then that's their time to say, I think we're going to have to look into something,
Right.
more serious.
And
And
there's an actual movement with
mhm,
psychiatry, psychology, and clergy,
okay,
to help both sides
okay,
understand where a line is, right?
hmm hmm
So that the pastor will know, okay, this is when I definitely need to say we need to, look at some kind of medication if the
hmm
family is willing for that, right? So,
hmm
but it is a movement that's been in place for a long time. My dad,
hmm
who was a pastor,
hmm
was involved in that, in trying to provide education and get education.
hmm
And so he hasn't been with us for 4 years now. So, but
I
he was
know.
doing that for years
Yeah,
before he
yeah,
passed away. So it's a big thing that's
yeah.
helpful.
It's hard. It's hard to see children suffer, and it's definitely hard to see some of the end results.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
I would like to think that um, if there's a child, and I'm just going to put this out there, if there's a child that we see who is struggling, whatever that struggle is, then we are able to identify, have a conversation, a loving conversation, and perhaps with a little bit of information, and avoid some of these end results, whether it's a child walking into a church and shooting everybody,
Mhm.
whether it's a child that harms another child to the
Mhm.
point of where sometimes that child makes it, sometimes they don't,
Mhm.
or whether it's a situation that they hold on to whatever it is, and as an adult, they end up harming other people. So if we can help to put as much information out there and give as many resources as possible, and to do it in a way that's not intimidating. I think intimidation, wouldn't you agree, has a lot to do with it as
Right.
to
I
why.
think I think the concept that you're talking about is trying to help people with love, right?
Mhm,
And saying, I'm recognizing a change in your
mhm,
child.
mhm,
And I don't know that I would say out of love. I'm talking to you so that I can
mhm,
provide this. Just want to let you know I was seeing this.
mhm.
And certainly it's different when Cheryl, the child psychiatrist, comes up and says something. People are like, "What are you doing looking at my child? I didn't ask you to do that." But when Aunt Leona comes up
Mhm,
and
mhm,
says, "I'm really worried because I'm seeing this, and I think
mhm,
this is different. Don't know if you've noticed,
mhm,
but just wanted to let you know I saw it too."
mhm,
I'm thinking about a time a long time ago, right? Because we've known each other for such a long time. I had
mhm,
a big party at my house, and you were there, and my brother was concerned about his son,
mhm.
and we had me, there was a psychologist, there were 2 special ed teachers that were there. I wanna say there was another person there too, and so we all did our observations, and
Mhm,
I said, "Yeah, Daryl, everybody here who works with children is concerned."
mhm,
And so, he was able to get resources
mhm.
because we all said that. And so I think if we're thinking about the fact it takes a village to raise a child,
That's right.
we all
That's right.
have our little villages and we
Mhm.
can use those resources. And then
Absolutely.
hopefully people will help and he will understand that we're all speaking out of love
Mhm,
when we
mhm,
say that.
mhm, mhm. Now, the good thing about that situation, and I say this too, is that your brother recognized that there
It's
was a problem,
happening. Mhm.
and he knew that he was in a safe place to be
Yeah.
able to say, guys, there's something, y'all see what I'm seeing? And you're able to say that. But there are so many out there who, unfortunately, they see the problem, as a parent, but they
Mhm.
don't want anybody to say anything. And what do you do?
Wow. Then you have to figure out how to get them to be able to hear you, right?
Mhm.
If you feel like it is a neglectful, abusive situation,
Mhm.
you can call Child Protective Services. You're
Mm.
not a mandated reporter
Mhm.
um, in Virginia, but I
Mhm.
believe I spoke with someone in Tennessee where everybody's a mandated reporter. If you see something going on, you have to call
You
Child
need to
Protective
report.
Services.
Mhm.
Right, you have to
Mhm.
report. So you do have that if you feel like there's abuse or neglect that's going on. If
Mhm.
you feel like something's being missed from a mental health perspective,
Mhm.
there's not, and unless you see that somebody is an acute danger to themselves or others as a result of mental illness, in that situation, you
Mhm.
could call Chesterfield Mental Health Crisis, right? Or a mental health
Mhm.
crisis place and say, I'm seeing a mental health crisis that's evolving. And,
Mhm.
there are some places where the police have a mental health line, right? There are police officers who are trained in making interventions in this area. And
Mhm.
families with people who are chronically mentally ill often know of the existence of these places. But
Okay.
those are, I think that the situations that you're talking about where somebody notices something,
Mhm.
the family member won't listen to them, it's often not that kind of an emergency.
Right.
And
Right.
there's boundaries, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Where you can't just, if the parent won't listen to you, there's not somebody else that you can tell.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so that's hard. Now, if you're working in
Mhm.
the school and you see it and it's not a CPS thing, then you at
Mhm.
least have that guidance counselor that's
Mhm.
there. Uh, but there's boundaries. And so
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure that I have the perfect answer for what to do if you're trying to say something to Mary Sue about their daughter who's on your soccer team, and Mary Sue's like, "Nope, my daughter's fine. Why are you asking me?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Then all you can do is just say, "Well, let me know if you want any more information later." And then
Mhm.
maybe that will work with Mary Sue. It might be 3 months, and then she'll come back
Mhm.
and say,
Mhm.
"What did you think you saw?" And then you could have a conversation about it because then she's ready to hear about it. But just like that young man, where
Mhm.
you're giving positive reinforcement about hanging up those clothes,
Uh-huh.
right? And he's not able to hear things at other times
Mhm.
until after he's gotten some positive reinforcement. Maybe you have to wait for that soccer game where everything's going really well, and
Mhm.
then you see something and you can go, "Hey, what did you see? I think I saw something. Did you see that, Mary Sue?" And that could happen, but
Mhm.
there's boundaries. Or if
There
you have a
is.
really good friend, like, another friend who might have noticed it,
Right.
that maybe somebody else is
Mhm.
able
Mhm.
to have that conversation.
That's true.
So there are official means of making reports, but I think a lot of
Mhm.
things are things that people just may not notice. And sometimes other people don't know if they can come and talk to the person.
That's what
Um, so
they're
it's a matter of utilizing your network and letting people know, I can hear from you. My kids were little. I had a great set of people who could give me information, and it was really helpful.
that's one of those things that uh, through this channel that has been so important of
Mhm.
being able to gather everyone around the table and encouraging that. And we're encouraging young homemakers, young moms who are new in the game.
Oh yeah,
We're
they get
fortunate
ready.
is that we've got a little wisdom behind us and a little practice and experience. But for those who are new, our mothers are getting younger sometimes,
Mhm.
and so you've got young mom who's dealing with situations that probably I didn't deal with until 13, 14 years down the line.
Mhm.
And for them, when they're dealing with that 13, 14, they're still a baby, so to speak, because they're still very young and trying to figure out their way. So we build communities where we can
Right.
and try to establish that conversation of being able to be the Aunt Leona, the Aunt Cheryl, the Aunt
Mhm.
Lou, whomever it is that we may be building
Mhm.
into our community. But we also, one thing we got to put out there too, we must be careful who we bring into the community. Because as you know, we've had, and I know you know of this situation of where we've had, it can be someone in your church that you think is absolutely wonderful, only to find later on that that person is engaging in some things that you probably don't really want your child involved in.
Mhm.
And so, as you think about finding friends, I know we tried to make sure, and I can say this for both of us, we tried to make sure our kids were around kids with parents who had the same values, and they were a part of church, they were a part of sports, someone that we could
Right.
see and see how they work.
Right.
But as we get beyond that, then sometimes we've got to make sure that we know who Johnny's mother is, because Johnny's mother may not be the mom that we think she is. As she puts that face on for, she may be the wicked witch, so to speak, behind closed doors. And
So
so,
yeah, I think it's just like what our mother said, right? Which is I need to know their mother, right?
absolutely,
And
I didn't
so
go
that
anywhere unless my mom knew them.
exactly.
Mhm,
And I I did this. I had my people too, right? And
mhm,
so
mhm,
I knew the moms at soccer, I knew the moms at band, I
mhm.
knew the moms at dance, and you have your crew and you're just doing the best you can to
Absolutely.
try and maintain safety. And then that way you have developed a group of people who are helpful.
Mhm.
And then you just keep an eye out,
Yeah.
knowing that everybody isn't always as they present. I was
That's right.
lucky that
Mhm.
I was able to find a large group of people where that worked well.
Mhm.
Every once in a while, I did the walk in a house and I saw something, and that didn't happen anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Sometimes it's just a matter of whomever it is just being in the presence.
right,
And, you, as parents, we're all, and I've said this before on the channel, nobody wrote a book for parenting. Well, they did,
they
but
wrote a bunch
who
of
had
them.
time enough? They had a whole bunch of them, but some
Mhm.
of them were out there. And then some of them, we have to develop our own habits, and we have to develop what is best for our family. And so, as parents, I'm saying to those of you in the audience, as you as parents, aunties, grandparents, keep your children close so you know who they're interacting with. You go to the games, excuse me, go to soccer, go to the skating rink, go to the school dance, and just kind of show up just to see who your children are. They don't even have to see you. Of course, I had the advantage. I taught at the same school. So
Right.
I could see
Mhm.
what was going on. But if you don't have that opportunity, volunteer and be a part of their surroundings. Get them used to seeing you and their friends seeing you,
Right.
and bring the
Helpful.
friends in, because what we learned, and you all are going to laugh, it was nothing during the winter when there was a snow day that Cheryl was either at my house or I was at her house, and all the kids were at one of the other's houses, and we had a throwdown. We were
Right.
playing cards and games, but you know what? We learned every child. We
Right.
knew who they were. We started to understand who they were. Some we liked, some we didn't like, but we got to know them. And the good thing was they got comfortable with us.
They did,
And
and they
so
felt
they
very
would
safe.
talk and tell us just we were the Kool-Aid house. So I'd say to you, develop your Kool-Aid house.
Right.
So, even with all that's going on right now, have a couple of friends over, with your child, And, we can do that responsibly. You can do it out on your deck. Throw a few sandwiches together and something to drink or some popsicles, depending on the age, and let the kids play. And sometimes you play with them so that they know this is a safe place. This is a fun place. I can talk to her. I can tell her, and you will start to notice when Johnny or Susie starts to change
Right.
and things aren't good. And so, plus, you develop that camaraderie with their parents.
Hmm.
They get to know you.
Let me add just one other corollary to
Mhm,
that is it's when you're talking about people who aren't as they present
mhm,
and things happening in places that you didn't expect to happen, it's
mhm,
important for your child to know that you're happy for them to come and tell you any of that
mhm.
and to
That's
tell
right.
them what the boundaries are, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So nobody should touch you where your swimsuit is unless they are a
Absolutely.
doctor, right?
Mhm,
Or, that kind of thing.
mhm,
Um, and if they have that knowledge,
mhm,
then grooming becomes more difficult,
mhm.
and that increases safety,
It does. It
right?
does.
Mhm.
Wow, Cheryl, our hour, we're already an hour and 5 minutes.
Oh my.
This was a great conversation. And, it may be that we may want to come back to the
Okay.
lunch table, once we really start to see what's going on. And, I think most of our audience is just, we want to be ready if needed. It's kind of like you'd rather have some education, rather have some information, rather than to have situations pop up and you don't know what to do.
Right.
And so I am just so happy to have you here today and to be able
Thank
to
you for inviting.
share what you know. And, because you're sharing it from a mom, aunt, the works. And so you can present it in a way that is non-threatening, and people understand and see your heart. So that is always a good thing. So I know my audience is going to be excited. And I'd say there's going to be a lot of comments in the comment box. And certainly, if you have a question that you want to give to Dr. Almateen, and she would be happy to answer. So just let her know. And if I see something first, I'll tune her in and let you
Yep.
know, go catch that question.
Mhm.
And because I will certainly try to give more information as time comes. As soon as we have everything set up, we will put the information down in the description box. Please, 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 this information is not just for you. Share it with anybody and everyone you know, because that neighbor who never comes out of the house and
Yeah.
they have children, they may be going through something. And the information that you share may be something that they really need and you just didn't know it. So we're laying seeds,
Yeah.
and we're hoping that those seeds will develop and grow. Cheryl, thanks again. This
Thank
has
you for
been
inviting
great.
me.
This has been
Yeah.
great. And like I said, I hope you will come back and to the lunch table. We will
Mhm.
certainly do that. And we may do this maybe after school starts and
Okay.
everybody's getting into the routine. You might want to come back in and just give us some quick tips
Sure.
and as some things that once the school starts, of what parents can do. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Now,
Happy to do it. Thank you so much for the invitation. I had a good
all right.